you had 45 minutes or so to try to cleanse your mind of this clutter. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything they'd like to say relative to that? You'd like to ask a question? Congratulations, we're all proud of you. That's not a question, that's a statement. Oh, you're getting there.
I was just actually interested in the type of evaluation criteria that you use to get data.
So I'm going to ask a question.
What evaluation criteria to get data?
Well, I mean, there's any range of possibilities. Any range of possibilities. So I can tell you the measures that we usually look at in general, but knowing that they change. We look at frequency of behavioral difficulties and intensity of behavioral difficulties. So the idea is that there's some evidence that if we could have high frequency, if we have going into a high frequency, high intensity problem, but over time we can agree that high frequency, low intensity, that's an improvement, we'll keep going. We look at, so frequency and intensity, we look at participation. Is there evidence that this person is engaging in other important things in his or her life? So we look at their participation. We look at, I'm trying to think what other measures we use. We use communication. Is there evidence that they're communicating what their needs, what they want, or just in general more effectively? We tend to use Likert kind of scales because they're quick. They're valid. They have additive validity, so over time what we can see. The idea that what we, one of the things that's interesting to sort of like loop back to what Jenny was talking about this morning, we have all these measures that we're going to be using that are I have never used in my life because it's impossible. So you're asking family members to do an assessment, you're asking an individual to do an assessment. So we think about a Likert kind of scale on a scale of 0 to 4, where you think about that kind of stuff over time. So participation, communication, behavior, what else am I missing? Social interaction, which is, is the person having increasing contact with people that may be atypical, untypical people that are positive? So for a lot of people, they just don't go out, so are they going out and engaging in other sort of normal kind of, did they join the bowling league? Did they start going to their friends who have fantasy football in the United States? Fantasy football is big. Did they join those kind of things? So participation, I'm trying to think we have a matrix. Participation, behavior, communication, attendance. So are they showing up to what they need to show up? Are they coming so that when I go to their house, are they there? So those are the 5 major measures.
So how formal and informal?
Now, on top of that, we also do sort of a goal attainment kind of measure that we ask people. So the individual and their family, we do not give that to the other people. Individual and family, are you feeling like you're moving towards a positive outcome, yes or no? And what's really kind of interesting, one of the things we started noticing is that the individual started identifying moving towards a goal sooner than we did. I have no evidence except that I just think that, after in your head you start thinking of things a little differently, you start feeling different. And the only way you can sort of get some kind of feedback around that is this goal attainment. So I feel like I'm moving more towards something that's important for me. And those are the general, but having said that, we'll have measures like, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a job? So, we adjust, those are the categories that you adjust based on, but we have that conversation before we do. Because often what happens is if you're not, it's just like I was saying before, if you don't, what the heck is the matter with you? Why don't you stand up here and do this thing? I give, and I give, and I give. Just like the problem part, we have to be really clear. We will not, somebody was saying about like goals and stuff like that. Remember what I said, this is conversational, and there are times we'll be stuck and we haven't come up with that. By the way, we call it valued outcome, not goals on purpose. Because once you talk goals, people go, yeah. But what is a valued outcome to you? Because goals is a rehab word. Now, we all have goals in our life, but we don't get up in the morning thinking, oh, maybe some of you obsessive compulsive out there do like that. But we don't think like the emoji, you know, we reflect in this sort of normative way. So we talk about valued outcome as something that's important to you, number one, and then the idea within that is, you know, it takes us time, and we've sat with people 4 and 5 and 6 times before we're able to, and somebody was saying, it was like, so people will say, you tell me. And you know what happens? We fucking do all the time. And as soon as you do that, done, game over. Because now they're my goals. And then when people don't meet them, what do we say? They were your goals and you didn't achieve them. So we spend a lot of time having conversations with people around those, and while we're doing that, we're also saying, how are we going to this work? It would be great if I could say that we have like great, the older behavior scale, I think it's a great idea, but never use it. In the work that we do, never use it. It's great. But we don't have a lot of schmucky graduate students running around doing that kind of stuff. We have messy people living in crazy places that are not interested in that kind of stuff. So what can we get as a measure that's something that's manageable? And there's always a compromise. I love more data. I was trained in behaviors. We love data, but you know what is the old saying? You got to remember one thing about data: you can't fatten a cow by weighing it. So sometimes people fall in love with data, and is it valid enough? I guess is what I'm saying. Is it reliable enough? Knowing that we are not doing research programs. Does that answer your question? Yep.
I'm just wondering, when you were sort of talking around defining the problem and the goal that you came up with the guy at the going to the ladies' rooms was very specific.
Yep.
And then sort of everything sort of flowed on from that definition
Yep.
of what the problem was. I guess like I'm thinking some of the clients I work with would have a dozen problems at work, specific problems, and a dozen more at home.
Sure.
And you know, how can they then use this to then generalize that, or can they then generalize this to solve in other contexts for other
Right.
specific
So the idea is you have all these people with all these
problems?
problems, and they have all these goals, and they have all these needs. How do you figure out where to start?
Well, can you do this with multiple things at the same time, or do you hope that they're able to then learn this process independently to apply it independently to other problems?
So can you do this with multiple things at the same time, or are you starting small and working your way up? Basically, that's the question. And the answer is yes. No, I mean, how's this? For some people, it's the one thing, one time. There's way too much complexity, there's way too much discord, there's way too much upset, there's way too much impairment, there's way too much crazy. So the idea we're going to say, whoa, and let's do this, is a recipe for disaster. Some people have never made a freaking goal in their life before they had the brain. Why would we expect them to be able to make goals after their brain? So the idea with that group of people, you have to think, oh, what's a reasonable amount? Like I said, we have conversations and we negotiate. How much? I have 12, I've got this. It's like, okay, if you could identify, like, what's the big thing? So we have this conversation, what are the 3 big things? There's 3. If we can identify the 3 big things that we want to work on, then we can build from there. The 3 big things tend to be foundational. They tend to be something that is, across all kinds of domains of life. So it could be like, my goal is to be able to take feedback from somebody without hurting them. Of course, that's the way I would say it, but it could be like, I just want to get along with my kids and not hit them. Great. I want to be able to take, I want my boss to give me a direction and me not lose my mind, because if I do that, I'm going to lose my job. So, there's the way that we frame them and the way that the individual frame them, but it's like, those are foundational. Those are interactive. Those are foundational elements. And we try to pull them out, like, but we always say, is this making sense to you or not? And if it's no, then it's no. We have people that will pick valued outcomes that we just don't agree with, but it's theirs. And usually what happens is, we learn pretty quickly that it ain't working so well. And what do we say? Well, we got something here, let's think about something else. What else could we try? And so the idea is we're introducing, we have a more simplified version of this, that we often sit down with people and say, it's goal plan review, we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. What's the goal, what's the plan, what's the obstacles, those kind of things. But the idea is we keep coming back to it and saying, is it working, is it not working? Is it working, is it not working? If it's not working, great. What do we learn and what do we try? So even the process is a way to address that issue with the process. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is this. Somebody says they got 12 or 13, and we say, can you narrow them down? And they say, no. We say, okay. Where do we start? Because 12 or 13 is big. Where do you want to start?
But are you meaning outcomes or problems?
Yes.
Outcomes.
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah, I mean, see, like I said, simple, and then you start thinking about it. And it is. I'm going to keep reminding you, this is a problem-solving set. It is a way of thinking. We are teaching everybody a way of thinking. It's got cognitive, it impacts your cognition. It impacts your emotions. It impacts your behavior. It impacts your it impacts social. It impacts across all domains of your life. And what we're trying to do is use the context of your life and try to create this framework that we all think about. And we're going to try it. And the good news is, so somebody says, I've got all these things, and oh my God, and so we get to all these outcomes. Okay, what's the worst that can happen? It gets so cluttered that nothing changes. That's a good thing, isn't it? Because instead of me saying, I think that's a little too much, the universe is teaching us. The world is teaching us. And we're not saying, I'm right, you're wrong. We're saying, what do we learn? And the way we organize our thought, we have to continuously remember those things. We all, just for others' work, we always try to start with one. We have, like I said, one thing one time, let's just start one and get good at it. We have people who are impatient, or we have people who think it's crap, or they say, okay, you have a theory, this is stupid, it's gonna suck, let's try it out. And I think that if you go into it with this notion that there's no magic here, but what we're trying to do is have everybody on the same. Now, what often happens is when a typical kind of way it works is the individual who is like the person who is the person who's the concern doesn't come to it as quickly as other network people, and that's okay. Because now we're multiplying our effect. They're not just depending upon me or somebody else. They're getting their husband, or they're getting their kids, or they're getting their bowling group, or they're getting their boss at Walmart engaged. And that's only a good thing, because then what people are seeing subtly, and by the way, incidentally, not directly, that there's a whole bunch of people around me that are thinking the same way. There may be something to this. And they may get it and not even know it. They may get it at a gut level and never understand it here. Fine, I don't care. Don't care. We don't spend a lot of time worrying about those things. What we try to do is, what's the functional outcome that we're going for here? So yeah, I mean, the more as you start it's like layers of it, and you start peeling it back and say, what about this? And what we say is like, well, how's it fit? This is really hard. Yeah. Where do we want to start? I want to start with it all. Okay. I've got these, I want to have a job on this. Great. So a couple weeks into it, how are we doing? Not very well. What are we learning? So that's part of the idea, is that we're clearly identifying how we know what's helping, what's not helping, and what we're doing is that we're all going in a bunch of different directions, so we're not all on the same page. What do you think we might be able to do about this? And I've had people say, you guys got to do your job better. Great. Tell me how. What am I missing? That's your job. Okay. So I can tell you how I think I should do my job. They're going to help you or not. Fuck you. Okay. You're an incompetent moron. You have a theory, I'm an incompetent moron. I have a theory, I'm incompetent, not a moron. Let's test it. And that's the idea that I think that I'm trying to help people capture here, which is, okay, I want to be an astronaut. Okay. I don't know that you're going to handle zero gravity very well, but give it a shot. I've had people say, I think I could do something in space because I love roller coasters. Okay. You got a theory there. I got a theory that roller coasters are not like space. So let me sort of walk you through it. One of my favorite examples ever is a guy, and some of you have heard this before, is my friend Joe, who had a very severe traumatic brain injury, and part of his brain injury, he had scotoma, so he had blank spots in his sight. And as he was coming through his recovery, his parents were very, very devout Catholics. So they'd go every day, and while he was still in coma, they would talk about how God had a plan, and that God was, he was still alive because God knew he was important, and all this other kind of stuff. And so as he slowly emerged from his coma, he had a pre-injury history of a little bit of mental illness as well. He came out and he decided that he was an archangel. Because God was talking to him through his scotoma. So he couldn't put together that his parents were talking and that's what he was hearing, but he thought God was talking to him through his scotoma. So when I met him, he was in a psychiatric hospital because, of course, the archangels, you know what those angels are, right? They're the ones who smite the non-believers. So they're not just angels. Those are the ones that are the guys who carry this, Gabriel on his horn kills all of us. Michael comes down and slays all the non-believers. Well, he was Archangel Joe. So, psychiatric hospital, comes in, I meet him, and he's like, and he had a theory. His theory was, I'm an archangel. He was legally blind. But he was convinced that God kept talking to him. So his theory was, now, how was that treated when he went into, so he tried to kill somebody, and he tried to smite them, and he went into the psychiatric setting, and how do you think when he said, I am an archangel, what did they do? What did they call it? Delusional. Schizophrenic. It's crazy. First time I met him, he used to say, I said, so you have this theory, you're an archangel, what's your evidence? And he said, I can change the weather. I was like, really? Like, how long does that take? He said, 4 or 5 days. You had a theory? You had an evaluation criteria? You had a specific evidence-based practice? You could go to the news and they would show him? You cried and you had to show everybody that kind of stuff? And I said, it's working, I'm an archangel. Look, the weather's changed. When I met him, we were sitting there and a fire truck went by, engines, horns blowing and stuff. In the middle of the conversation, stopped. I said, I made that happen. So I know I can control that. So I said, okay, but I have another theory. I said, if you're an archangel, do it again. He did not like that I was not believing his theory. So what did he try to do? Smite me over the table. That was awesome. So he had a theory that he was an archangel. I never said he wasn't. And I was like, so I went away, got a little treatment, came back a little while later. I let everything bounce back. For a while there, I was talking like that. It was awesome. I like it was my husky voice time. Anyway, so he, I was like, oh, that didn't work out so well. And he called me back. His mother said he wants to talk to you. And he said, you're the first person who didn't say I'm crazy. You're the first person who said you don't know. I said, you got a theory, I got a theory. You have a theory, an archangel, I have a theory, you're not. Let's test it. So what we did is we came up with a series of things, and he agreed. And I said, so what we'll do is just randomly say, okay, we'll try some things out, and we'll use that as evidence you're being an archangel. So one of the tests he had was, I was sitting in his porch, in his apartment, there was a bunch of birds, and I said, okay, can we do an archangel test? And if he said no, then I'd be like, okay, we're not ready to test our theories today, it's fine. Yeah, I would like you to have one of the birds come over, land on my shoulder, and sing. Okay, so he turns and he does this whole thing, and of course then he doesn't see me, and I'm like, because my luck would be a fucking bird. I'd be like, okay, you're an archangel. So the bird doesn't land. What is the response then? So they go, aha! You are not an archangel. I said, that's one data point. It's a data point. That's what? He likes to play golf. He's legally blind. He had some sight so he could line up a shot and stuff. Prior to his interview, he was a really good golfer. So I went and played golf with him. And on one hole, par 4, like 485 yards, I'm like, Joe, can we test your archangel theory? And he's like, sure. I said, I want you to hit a hole in one. Lines up, hits the ball as hard as he can, and duck hooks it into the water. And he's like, did it go in? I'm like, the water? Did I say, you're not an archangel? No, I said,